Made in USSR. Сделано в СССР. That label, I remember being all around me on everything when I was a child, when I was growing up. Literally on everything. There was nothing else around. There was nothing that was not made in the USSR. I'm talking about early 80s, time I remember. At about age 10, I asked this very first sedition, I had sedition thought. I was thinking, why are they putting this label on everything, this mark on everything? Why we don't have anything not made in the USSR? Everything is made in the USSR by default. But then, what did I know? I was 10 years old. It was later years of the USSR when the floodgate of imported goods was open. Around 87, 88, back then it was clear that the industry of the Soviet Union was basically falling apart. Not only it wasn't manufacturing enough, it was manufacturing so little there was nothing in the stores. So the imported goods, everything, from apparel, from shoes, from blue jeans to TV sets, imported goods started flooding into the country. And at that point, only at that point, we could start making comparisons of the goods that were made in the USSR and the imported goods. And it turned out that almost everything that was manufactured in the USSR was garbage, pure garbage, the low quality, inconvenient to use, would not last long, would break down. It was absolute garbage. P.T. Barnum wouldn't like to be living in the USSR. He had nothing to do there, but he would love to be living in what was about to come, Russia. Because compared to Russia, what we have in Russia right now, the USSR was manufacturing paradise. Howdy, everyone. Welcome to Inside Russia. My name is Konstantin. Streaming live, giving you latest updates, news, my thoughts and takes on what's happening in Russia. The usual Russia explained by the unusual Russian. Thank you for coming, giving me a chance. I have quite a message for you today. Why did the USSR came to my mind? Why did I remember it? Not because Russia of November and December of 2022 reminds of the USSR, and the longer we live, it reminds more and more. No, not because of that. It's because I wanted to change to compare production. What was produced in the USSR and what's produced in Russia now. Because, hey, USSR is communism, 20th century. Russia is capitalism, 21st century. Must be a great difference. Now, let's take a few steps back and talk about the USSR. I'll tell you the story that I remember, my personal story, so to speak. The USSR produced everything. All walks of life, or all corners of life, so to speak. But just like Russia today, recently, became isolated, the USSR had been isolated for decades. So it relied on manufacturing everything itself domestically for its survival. They were So everything that was needed was produced. And there were two types of goods. High military hardware, which was cutting edge, excellent quality, probably world's best quality, and everything else, aka garbage. Um, Let me give you an example. What I mean. In Russia, they were. Let's compare in the USSR. I'm sorry. Let's compare two factories. One factory was real factories. I remember. The factory was in Rostov-on-Don. In it produced shoes. Shoes for everyone, for regular people. There was a planning agency called Gosplan in Moscow. We had planned economy in the USSR, after all, no market economy. So the agency planned everything for everyone. It planned for that particular factory. It gave the plan to the director saying, in the year of, let's say, 1980, you must manufacture so many pairs of shoes. And this is what kind of shoes you must manufacture. And this is who are you going to ship it to. Different stores all over Russia, Soviet USSR, and this is how much they're going to pay you. Done deal. So they didn't really go extra mile of making things. They just did as they were told to do. And they did pretty bad job because the result of their job was not, they didn't have KPI, so to speak. They just had to meet the plan. And if the shoes would tear apart once somebody bought them, they didn't care. So they tried to work as least as possible, but to make the plan, to meet the plan. That's the consumer goods, aka garbage. And that was pretty much everything like that. There's another example. There's a factory, a secret factory, that manufactured the acoustics systems for warplanes, for Navy ships, for nuclear submarines. And the acoustic systems were cutting edge, the best in the world, the best research, years ahead of its time. Excellent quality. And the quality of hardware manufactured was insane. It's one simple reason. People who were employed by that factory, they bore personal responsibility for the result of their work. They were compensated quite handsomely, so they were motivated to work, but they held personal responsibility. Therefore, they worked as they were supposed to. But then there was conversia, the conversion. That term came from the military, meaning to cover up, to give the legend to that factory, it had to produce something of a consumer good. So there was a certain department, that a certain assembly line separated from the main factory, but right next to it, and they were producing loudspeakers. Loudspeakers were called radiotechnica, and they're still sought after by the enthusiasts right now because their quality is fantastic. They're like 40 years old, but they still work. And also the components manufactured radiotechnica, and they had the military grade, insides, and they were excellent. But then conversia stuff was very famous in the USSR, was sought after, and not too many examples of conversia, okay? So there were very few goods, very high quality. Same with cars. Russia did not have a car manufacturing industry until the late 70s, and it wanted to build small cars for people. So basically, it came to Italy. The Soviet government came to Italy and bought a plant, Fiat, An old plant was transferred to Taliati, a Russian Soviet city, and Italians came and they set everything up. And this is how Ladas or Zhigulis were born. That's not Russian engineering, or not Russian cars. That's Italian, old Italian cars, right? And the first cars, for about a year, the Italians were on site and they were supervising the processes. Therefore, the quality of first cars was actually good. First Ladas, I think manufactured in 1971, were actually Italian quality standard. But then Italians left and it went downhill, okay? That's how it worked in the USSR. Then again, the imported goods started flooding Russia, and we had a chance to compare. And boy, we were angry, we were surprised, because before that we had been used to, we thought that all goods in the world are like that. If you buy Soviet-made tape recorder and it breaks, it's kind of the same thing all over the world. Anyone buys a tape recorder, it must break because they're not reliable. But then all of a sudden a Sony tape recorder starts being sold in the USSR, and we buy it and we compare and we go, what is this? Does it come from Mars? Gosh, Anyway, this is how the Soviet things worked. Now fast forward to Russia, 2022. Before the fall of the USSR and 22, there were 30 years. In 30 years, Russia actually had manufacturing. And it greatly improved from the times of the USSR, because everything, for some time before the government started taking everything back, everything belonged to private companies or people, private properties. Therefore, they tried to create good products, compete, and sell at high price. Right? That's capitalism for you. But historically, Russian companies, they were struggling in Russia with manufacturing. I was looking at why, because it was very interesting for me. Not just manufacturing, everything, construction. The eye-opening moment for me was 2015. Russia annexed Crimea, and the following year, Crimea faced lots of shortages. There was a logistical period when everything was being transferred from Ukrainian standards to Russian standards and so forth, And I remember there were problems with agriculture. And farmers, they were complaining that they were not given support, that just they couldn't compete with cheaper vegetables, fruits from Russia and from even Turkey. And I remember the Minister of Agriculture of Crimea back then, he came out and he publicly said that it's cheaper to take money, fly to Turkey, well, not fly, but import Turkish produce, fruits and vegetables, and sell it in Crimea, and it's going to be cheaper, as if that stuff would be grown in Crimea and sold locally. So to grow things and then sell would be more expensive than to import from Turkey. And I was thinking, what the hell? But then I understood that's the paradigm of post-USSR Russia. Lots of manufacturing plants, let's say manufacturing cars, okay? Russian Ladas, Russian trucks called Kamaz. They outsourced lots of things like electronics, components, engines sometimes, from other countries. I remember a Swedish company was coming into Russia to manufacture. Then there was a huge joint venture with Chinese, but then they were buying from China. And it was much more reliable and much cheaper to do that. And then after I heard that guy from Crimea, I understood why. Vladimir Putin himself said many times that The Russia's biggest problem is corruption. And there were over 10 million bureaucrats in Russia, and each one of them owned a little bit of power. Some more, some less, but a bureaucrat always owns power. He or she controls certain processes that take place inside of the government. And a lot of bureaucrats, I made a stream about that, how the corrupted officials would steal money in Russia and then would move out to Spain, to the United States, to France to live permanently, would move their families and so forth. They're bureaucrats, government officials. And let's say you have a power to grant or not grant a license to produce engines. No one really, you're not responsible to anyone. Someone comes to you and says, listen, I would like to manufacture engines. And you look at him and you go, whoa, you know what? That's a very difficult decision. You need to come up with so much paperwork. We need to do due diligence. We need to do reviews. It might take years before we grant you permission. Of course, if there's a mistake made, we have to start all over again. So, you're welcome to try. And then he looks at you and goes, what if I make it worthwhile to you? And you go, well, let's talk, So as long as you're not greedy and you don't keep everything to yourself, if you know what I mean, you send some... Then that's how the corruption in Russia worked. And I think the biggest problem, challenge for manufacturing was, for private manufacturing, of course, was the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy had a grip on everything, and it made manufacturing domestically more expensive than outsourcing components and assembly. I could be wrong, but I think that's what the biggest problem was. Okay. And that was happening for the 30 years. So corruption was rampant in Russia. And then comes February 24th. We know what happens. Vladimir Putin claims personal responsibility, saying he made decision to attack and invade Ukraine. Nice. Russia becomes isolated, becomes a pariah. It's actually much worse than the USSR now. We're so much more isolated than the Soviet Union. It's unbelievable. And of course, Western companies leave. They take their technology with them. And the companies that are outside Russia supplying different stuff, components, engines, materials, technologies, they say, you know what, we don't want to do business with you any longer. That's it. And everyone stops selling everything to Russia. The moment of truth comes. Well, it was happening. It didn't happen overnight. It happened over a few months. But now we can look at the results. This is November 2022. Well, I'm sorry, this is December already. It's going to be 10 months. In a couple of short months, it's going to be 1 year. And it's just unbelievable. Okay, this is insane. So what do we have now? What is the situation with manufacturing? I'm going to tell you about what's going on, and I will compare how it compares to the USSR. Made in USSR, is it better than made in Russia? Or vice versa? Made in Russia better than made in USSR? I'll start off with example that happened to me personally. I was in power plant construction for a long time. And the heart of any power plant is a turbine. We worked with gas-powered and coal-powered turbines. There are a couple companies in Russia that manufacture turbines, and they were a few players, Western manufacturers, the juggernauts, Siemens, General Electric, Mitsubishi, and the Chinese manufacturers. So there was one tender, in Kazakhstan that we were bidding on to supply a turbine. The plant was a huge plant, but it was old Soviet technology inside. And one of their turbines simply became obsolete. They needed the same turbine, but the new one. Okay, because the previous one had been in operation for like 45 years. So they ordered a turbine. We went to the turbine manufacturer. They gave us a commercial offer. It's like a binding contract. And we took that. We bid and we won the contract. We were about to sign, we already signed the contract for delivery, installation, and commissioning of the gas-fired turbine. And then we go, it's a normal procedure. That's how it works. We go to the manufacturer, set up a meeting, and then after a couple of days, the manufacturer comes back and says, well, you know what? We must back out of this deal. What? I had never heard of any manufacturer backing out of, deal like that. It's their sale of a turbine. To sell one turbine is a huge deal for a plant. Well, why? Because we can't, they started giving us runaround, but then we got down to it. They said at the end, they were being honest, that we can't do it. We cannot do it because the turbine is old. The blueprints have lost. There were two engineers that actually remember designing that turbine a long time ago, but they're very old, and there's no one who can manufacture this turbine. So we must back out, and they did. And we lost the contract, we lost reputation, we lost lots of money, but this is what happened, one of the Russian companies. And I asked them informally, I said, guys, how do you work? If you can't sell your product, main product turbines, yes, well, we get subsidies from the government, we take smaller contracts, we get by. That's example number one. Example number two, all famous Moskvich. Moskvich, if you don't know, it's a Russian car. The first one was Lada, and it was built by French. Basically, Lada is a Fiat. Oh, not French. Forgive me. The Italians, of course, Fiat. And the Soviet government bought the entire plant from Fiat. They transferred all technology, all equipment, they set everything up, and there you go. We had Ladas. But then Russians started designing their own cars. And there was a factory built, I think it was built a long time ago, but they designed brand new car, and the factory was right in the middle of center of Moscow. And the factory was called Moskvich. And Moskvich is the Muscovite in Russian. And they were like old World War II era cars, and all of a sudden they came up with a brand new development, brand new model. Late 70, I think 79. And they started manufacturing in 1984. Well, it definitely looked much different from what they manufactured before, because before that, again, the type of cars they manufactured around World War II. And in early 90s, Moskvich were considered crap. Terrible quality, they broke down, so often, and they didn't cost much. So my mom and dad finally saved up some money. It wasn't much, but it was okay. In the 90s, early 90s, they started making more money in the 90s than they were making before in the 80s. And decided to buy a car. Woohoo! So the only money we had was to buy Moskvich. A used 2-year-old Moskvich. The guy was so upset with that. He wanted to sell it without money. Just give us a credit for a few years. But he ended up giving a discount, and voila, we became the proud owners of Moskvich. And let me tell you, it was my first car. I learned how to drive. I can't even call it a car, really. It was like a little little trolley with 4 wheels, an engine, and a steering wheel. But it was my first car. I still remember it. And every time we would drive somewhere for a day trip, so forth, of some kind, and then we would come back and it would break down. My father uh, was good about fixing cars. He was great with fixing everything. Okay, like hands of gold. So he fixed. He knew Moskvich inside and out. He could have had a second job of being a car mechanic. He actually enjoyed it quite a bit too. That was his first car too. But anyway, the car was so troublesome. It didn't drive well. It used gas like it was a huge tank. It broke down all the time. Sometimes it broke down when we were driving. We would have to stand on the side of the road and try to fix it, try to figure out. And all of a sudden, couple months ago, well, not couple months, a month ago, I hear that legendary Moskvich is going to be produced in Moscow again at the factory of old Moskvich. You know, this is incredible. This is P.T. Barnum stuff. You gotta understand. I was the owner of Moskvich. I drove it, I fixed it. I know the car well. It was nothing but legendary. It was a piece of crap. Pardon my French. It was garbage. I remember we spent so much time, efforts, money, nerves fixing it. Constant fixing. And then right now they're telling us legendary Moskvich. And they give us these fancy pictures all over in the media outlets, you know, the TV channels, in government run websites and so forth. I look at it and I go, there's something wrong here. They can tell me anything. They can tell me that Martians have come and roaming around us. They can tell me that there are reptiloids living among us. They can tell me that, this little green man from Alpha Centauri come at night and, feed on grass or something like that. Well, I'll believe it before I believe that Moskvich is legendary, because I know how legendary that was. And some Russians, they start cheering. They go, whoa, Moskvich, good, it's back. It was a good car. Yeah, right. So anyway, a few days ago, there's a press conference from the Moskvich plant. And the Moskvich was falling apart, so and it was bought out by Renault, the French automaker. And Renault completely revamped, restored the plant, built a brand new plant, and started producing decent cars, Renaults, different models. And then in March or in April, it left Russian market forfeiting a loss of 3.2 billion euros. Now they forgot about Renault. Renault is not in the picture anymore. It's Moskvich plant. It's old Moskvich plant. No, it's not. It's a freaking Renault plant, okay? There's a press conference. Fancy people, reporters, brand new Moskviches coming out of a conveyor belt. They showing, there's a video, they're explaining how Moskviches are being assembled, but wait a second. They're not really Moskviches. They're Anyway, this is what happened. They bought Chinese cars in China. Before shipping, the Chinese, at the request of the buyer, disassembled the cars. They took the wheels apart and the steering wheels, and they put them right next to the car. So they shipped the car to Moscow, to the old Moskvich, now Renault plant. And these people, they can't operate the Renault plant because French left, and, they basically didn't transfer anything to the Russians. So these people, the new owners of Renault, they cannot even turn the conveyor belt. It's not working. They don't know what to do, okay? So they took a little part for good for a few cars, and they actually made a press conference, and they hired a few workers, and they lifted the cars, the car kits, so to speak, without wheels. And on camera, they were assembling the wheels, and they were putting Moskvich logo, Moskvich Model 3 on the car, and they put a label, made in Russia. Therefore, we have Moskvich, which is a Russian car. Voila! Behold! This is unbelievable, folks. So this is the story of Moskvich, but it gets better. There's another story. The story of a war drone, well, the general use drone. Russia doesn't manufacture drones. I don't know why it used to send rockets to space, but it buys drones from Iran, although it denies that it's buying drones from Iran, but Iran admits. He's saying, hey, we are selling it to Russia, and they can say whatever they want to, but we're selling, we've sold so many drones. And now Iran is placing a manufacturing plant, also assembly plant, I think, not manufacturing, in Russia somewhere. They just signed an agreement to make Russian drones just like... by the way, that Chinese car cost 900,000 rubles in China, but it's sold here for 2 million rubles. Good business. Whoever owns Moskvich, they're gonna be swimming in money, let me tell you. Business, P.T. Barnum stuff. So anyway, there's a news report about this Russian company, of course it's owned by the government, that finally made a breakthrough. It designed and manufactured its own Russian-made drone. There's a fellow spokesperson, stands in front of the camera, and with a serious face, poker face, says, well, you know what, this is the first development, this is the first 100% Russia-made product, the drone. And he tells, engineering made in Russia, manufacturing made in Russia, this made in Russia, everything, fine-tuning made in Russia, the whole 9 yards. It can be used for firefighting, for deliveries, and of course it can be used for military purposes. Well, we understand where he's getting at, right? The government, the military purposes. And then they start taking close-ups of the drone, and people started noticing, like, wait a second. This operator standing, and he's using a completely Chinese-made remote control. The model is right there. It's seen on the camera. It's called Radio Master. You can buy one on AliExpress, and then they take a closer look at the drone itself and like, wait a second. This is a Chinese manufactured drone, non-military. It's a speed drone, like do in the races. It's called iFlight in this model. And it's just on top of this drone, there's a plastic cover with a Russian name and that says made in Russia. They don't even take barcodes of the drone, so it's a Russian cover, it's made in Russia, but the barcode says it's made in China, and it gives the exact manufacturer and exact details. So this company manufactures so-called Russian drones in Russia completely, from A to Z, the entire process, but the very same drone can be bought in China for about $900, but here in Russia, the cost of this drone is over $2,000. And of course, the customer is the government, right? The government paid for design of this drone, complete design. It's paying for complete manufacturing. The cost is, well, it must be high quality, therefore it's expensive, over $2,000, 130,000 rubles. I don't know what to tell you, folks, okay? This is not Stephen King, but this is P.T. Barnum stuff, okay? I'm just waiting until it turns into Stephen King stuff. This is insane. Same thing goes for pretty much everything. Russia does not have own manufacturing. It that another example, just a quick example. A company called, I think it was called Irkut, and it produces planes, superjets. Well, everything in the plane, engine, avionics, electronics components comes from different manufacturers, foreign manufacturers. Avionics is French. Engines, turbine engines, they're also foreign made and so forth. Like I said in a couple streams before, they stopped manufacturing the planes. They take old replacement engines and put into the new planes because, no one supplies them stuff anymore and they can't manufacture the planes. And the planes are supposed to be 100% Russian. The government paid lots of money to this company for the development of the plane. Russian cars, Ladas, are not manufacturing, I think they're trying to cut down to the bare bones, not to use any electronics, so therefore they can produce some kind of a car, some kind of a product. Same thing for KAMAZ, for trucks, for combine harvesters. Nothing is manufactured in Russia. And then comes my question. What is better, made in the USSR or made in Russia? The answer is obvious, at least they manufactured something in the USSR. And they do not manufacture anything. And I'm not talking about the military stuff. That is a black box, completely out of our eyes. I don't even want to look at it. But as for consumers, as for business, B2B, B2C, they do not manufacture anything. So I'm really sorry to say, but made in the USSR, сделано в СССР, rocks compared to made in Russia. And this has been my message for today. Thank you so very much. Appreciate you coming, giving me a chance. Thank you. Before I turn on the comment, I would like to ask you two favors. First, sign for my Telegram channel. I am planning on doing a live stream on Wednesday, day after tomorrow, and on Friday, 2 live streams on Telegram channel, doing behind the scenes of my streams and my videos inside Konstantin's Russia. And second favor, would you please post this message in social media accounts so my message gets spread more? I would really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Turning on the comments. I would love to hear your opinions, comments, or questions. I'd love to answer.